The Scarecrow of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Foreword read by Scott Sherris, Atlanta, Georgia. The Scarecrow of Oz. Dedicated to the Uplifters of Los Angeles, California, in grateful appreciation of the pleasure I have derived from association with them, and in recognition of their sincere endeavor to uplift humanity through kindness, consideration, and good fellowship. They are big men, all of them, and all with the generous hearts of little children. L. Frank Baum. The Scarecrow of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Twixt you and me. The army of children which besieged the post office, conquered the postmen, and delivered to me its imperious commands, insisted that Trot and Cap'n Bill be admitted to the land of Oz, where Trot could enjoy the society of Dorothy, Betsy Bobbin, and Ozma, while the one-legged sailor-man might become a comrade of the Tin Woodman, the Shaggy Man, Tik-Tok, and all the other quaint people who inhabit this wonderful fairyland. It was no easy task to obey this order and land Trot and Cap'n Bill safely in Oz, as you will discover by reading this book. Indeed, it required the best efforts of our dear old friend, the Scarecrow, to save them from a dreadful fate on the journey. But the story leaves them happily located in Ozma's splendid palace, and Dorothy has promised to me that Button-Bright and the three girls are sure to encounter, in the near future, some marvelous adventures in the land of Oz, which I hope to be permitted to relate to you in the next Oz book. Meantime, I am deeply grateful to my little readers for their continued enthusiasm over the Oz stories, as evinced in the many letters they send me, all of which are lovingly cherished. It takes more and more Oz books every year to satisfy the demands of old and new readers, and there have been formed many Oz reading societies where the Oz books owned by different members are read aloud. All this is very gratifying to me and encourages me to write more stories. When the children have had enough of them, I hope they will let me know, and then I'll try to write something different. L. Frank Baum, Royal Historian of Oz, Ozcott at Hollywood in California, 1915. End of foreword.
The Scarecrow of Oz, Chapter 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 1, narrated by Kara Shallenberg. www.kray.org. The Scarecrow of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 1. The Great Whirlpool.
"Seems to me,"
said Cap'n Bill, as he sat beside Trot under the big acacia tree, looking out over the blue ocean.
"Seems to me, Trot, as how the more we know, the more we find we don't know."
"I can't quite make that out, Cap'n Bill,"
answered the little girl in a serious voice, after a moment's thought, during which her eyes followed those of the old sailor-man across the glassy surface of the sea.
"Seems to me that all we learn is just so much gained."
"I know. It looks that way at first sight,"
said the sailor, nodding his head.
"but those as knows the least have a habit of thinking they know all there is to know, while them as knows the most admits what a turrible big world this is. It's the knowing ones that realize one lifetime ain't long enough to get more'n a few dips of the oars of knowledge."
Trot didn't answer. She was a very little girl, with big solemn eyes, and an earnest simple manner. Cap'n Bill had been her faithful companion for years, and had taught her almost everything she knew. He was a wonderful man, this Cap'n Bill. Not so very old, although his hair was grizzled, what there was of it. Most of his head was bald as an egg, and as shiny as oilcloth, and this made his big ears stick out in a funny way. His eyes had a gentle look, and were pale blue in color, and his round face was rugged and bronzed. Cap'n Bill's left leg was missing from the knee down, and that was why the sailor no longer sailed the seas. The wooden leg he wore was good enough to stump around with on land, or even to take Trot out for a row or a sail on the ocean, but when it came to "runnin' up aloft," or performing active duties on shipboard, The old sailor was not equal to the task. The loss of his leg had ruined his career, and the old sailor found comfort in devoting himself to the education and companionship of the little girl. The accident to Cap'n Bill's leg had happened at about the time Trot was born, and ever since that he had lived with Trot's mother as a star boarder, having enough money saved up to pay for his weekly keep. He loved the baby and often held her on his lap. Her first ride was on Cap'n Bill's shoulders, for she had no baby carriage, and when she began to toddle around, the child and the sailor became close comrades and enjoyed many strange adventures together. It is said the fairies had been present at Trot's birth, and had marked her forehead with their invisible mystic signs, so that she was able to see and do many wonderful things. The acacia tree was on top of a high bluff, but a path ran down the bank in a zigzag way to the water's edge, where Cap'n Bill's boat was moored to a rock by means of a stout cable. It had been a hot, sultry afternoon, with scarcely a breath of air stirring, so Cap'n Bill and Trot had been quietly sitting beneath the shade of the tree, waiting for the sun to get low enough for them to take a row. They had decided to visit one of the great caves which the waves had washed out of the rocky coast during many years of steady effort. The caves were a source of continual delight to both the girl and the sailor, who loved to explore their awesome depths.
"I believe, Cap'n,"
remarked Trot at last,
"that it's time for us to start."
The old man cast a shrewd glance at the sky, the sea, and the motionless boat. Then he shook his head.
Maybe it's time, Trot,
he answered.
But I don't just like the looks of things this afternoon.
"What's wrong?"
she asked wonderingly.
Can't say as to that. Things is too quiet to suit me, that's all. No breeze, not a ripple atop the water, nary a gull a-flying anywhere, and the end of the hottest day of the year. I ain't no weather prophet, Trot, but any sailor would know the signs is ominous."
"There's nothing wrong that I can see,"
said Trot.
"If there was a cloud in the sky even as big as my thumb we might worry about it, but look, Captain, the sky is as clear as can be."
He looked again and nodded.
"Perhaps we can make the cave, all right,"
he agreed, not wishing to disappoint her.
"It's only a little way out, and we'll be on the watch. So come along, Trot."
Together they descended the winding path to the beach. It was no trouble for the girl to keep her footing on the steep way, but Cap'n Bill, because of his wooden leg, had to hold on to rocks and roots now and then to save himself from tumbling. On a level path he was as spry as anyone, but to climb uphill or down required some care. They reached the boat safely, and while Trot was untying the rope, Cap'n Bill reached into a crevice of the rock and drew out several tallow candles and a box of wax matches, which he thrust into the capacious pockets of his sou'wester. This sou'wester was a short coat of oilskin, which the old sailor wore on all occasions, when he wore a coat at all, and the pockets always contained a variety of objects, useful and ornamental, which made even Trot wonder where they all came from, and why Cap'n Bill should treasure them. The jackknives, a big one and a little one, the bits of cord, the fish hooks, the nails, these were handy to have on certain occasions, but bits of shell and tin boxes with unknown contents, buttons, pincers, bottles of curious stones, and the like, seemed quite unnecessary to carry around. That was Cap'n Bill's business, however, and now that he added the candles and the matches to his collection, Trot made no comment, for she knew these last were to light their way through the caves. The sailor always rowed the boat, for he handled the oars with strength and skill. Trot sat in the stern and steered. The place where they embarked was a little bight, or circular bay, and the boat cut across a much larger bay toward a distant headland, where the caves were located right at the water's edge. They were nearly a mile from shore and about halfway across the bay, when Trot suddenly sat up straight and exclaimed,
"What's that, Cap'n?"
He stopped rowing and turned half around to look.
"That, Trot,
he slowly replied,
looks to me mighty like a whirlpool."
What makes it, Captain?
A whirl in the air makes the whirl in the water. I was afraid as we'd meet with trouble, Trot. Things didn't look right. The air was too still.
It's coming closer,
said the girl. The old man grabbed the oars and began rowing with all his strength.
"'Tain't coming closer to us, Trot,"
he gasped.
"It's we that are coming closer to the whirlpool. The thing is drawing us to it like a magnet."
Trot's sun-bronzed face was a little paler as she grasped the tiller firmly and tried to steer the boat away, but she said not a word to indicate fear. The swirl of the water as they came nearer made a roaring sound that was fearful to listen to. So fierce and powerful was the whirlpool that it drew the surface of the sea into the form of a great basin, slanting downward near the center, where a big hole had been made in the ocean. A hole with walls of water that were kept in place by the rapid whirling of the air. The boat in which Trot and Cap'n Bill were riding was just on the outer edge of this saucer-like slant, and the old sailor knew very well that unless he could quickly force the little craft away from the rushing current, they would soon be drawn into the great black hole that yawned in the middle. So he exerted all his might and pulled as he had never pulled before. He pulled so hard that the left oar snapped in two and sent Cap'n Bill sprawling upon the bottom of the boat. He scrambled up quickly enough and glanced over the side. Then he looked at Trot, who sat quite still, with a serious far-away look in her sweet eyes. The boat was now speeding swiftly of its own accord, following the line of the circular basin round and gradually drawing nearer to the great hole in the center. Any further effort to escape the whirlpool was useless, and realizing this fact, Cap'n Bill turned toward Trot and put an arm around her, as if to shield her from the awful fate before them. He did not try to speak, because the roar of the waters would have drowned the sound of his voice. These two faithful comrades had faced dangers before, but nothing to equal that which now faced them. Yet Cap'n Bill, noting the look in Trot's eyes and remembering how often she had been protected by unseen powers, did not quite give way to despair. The great hole in the dark water, now growing nearer and nearer, looked very terrifying, but they were both brave enough to face it and await the result of the adventure. End of Chapter 1. The Scarecrow of Oz, Chapter 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Kara Shallenberg. The Scarecrow of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 2. The Cavern Under the Sea. The circles were so much smaller at the bottom of the basin, and the boat moved so much more swiftly, that Trot was beginning to get dizzy with the motion, when suddenly the boat made a leap, and dived headlong into the murky depths of the hole. Whirling like tops, but still clinging together, the sailor and the girl were separated from their boat, and plunged down, 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 into the farthermost recesses of the great ocean. At first their fall was swift as an arrow, but presently they seemed to be going more moderately, and Trot was almost sure that unseen arms were about her, supporting her and protecting her. She could see nothing, because the water filled her eyes and blurred her vision, but she clung fast to Cap'n Bill's sou'wester, while other arms clung fast to her, and so they gradually sank down and down until a full stop was made, when they began to ascend again. But it seemed to Trot that they were not rising straight to the surface from where they had come. The water was no longer whirling them, and they seemed to be drawn in a slanting direction through still, cool ocean depths, and then, in much quicker time than I have told it, up they popped to the surface, and were cast at full length upon a sandy beach, where they lay choking and gasping for breath, and wondering what had happened to them. Trot was the first to recover. Disengaging herself from Cap'n Bill's wet embrace and sitting up, she rubbed the water from her eyes and then looked round her. A soft bluish-green glow lighted the place, which seemed to be a sort of cavern, for above and on either side of her were rugged rocks. They had been cast upon a beach of clear sand, which slanted upward from the pool of water at their feet, a pool which doubtless led into the big ocean that fed it. Above the reach of the waves of the pool were more rocks, and still more and more, into the dim windings and recesses of which the glowing light from the water did not penetrate. The place looked grim and lonely, but Trot was thankful that she was still alive, and had suffered no severe injury during her trying adventure under water. At her side Cap'n Bill was sputtering and coughing, trying to get rid of the water he had swallowed. Both of them were soaked through, yet the cavern was warm and comfortable, and a wetting did not dismay the little girl in the least. She crawled up the slant of sand, and gathered in her hand a bunch of dried seaweed, with which she mopped the face of Cap'n Bill and cleared the water from his eyes and ears. Presently the old man sat up and stared at her intently. Then he nodded his bald head 3 times, and said in a gurgling voice,
"Mighty good, Trot, mighty good. We didn't reach Davy Jones's locker that time, did we? Though why we didn't, and why we're here, is more'n I can make out."
"Take it easy, Captain,"
she replied.
"We're safe enough, I guess, at least for the time being."
He squeezed the water out of the bottoms of his loose trousers, and felt of his wooden leg and arms and head, and finding he had brought all of his person with him, he gathered courage to examine closely their surroundings.
"Where d'ye think we are, Trot?"
he presently asked.
"Can't say, Captain. Perhaps in one of our caves."
He shook his head.
"No,"
said he.
"I don't think that at all. The distance we came up didn't seem half as far as the distance we went down, and you'll notice there ain't any outside entrance to this cavern whatever. It's a regular dome over this pool of water, and unless there's some passage at the back up yonder, we're fast prisoners."
Trot looked thoughtfully over her shoulder.
"When we're rested,"
she said,
"we will crawl up there and see if there's a way to get out."
Cap'n Bill reached in the pocket of his oilskin coat and took out his pipe. It was still dry, for he kept it in an oilskin pouch with his tobacco. His matches were in a tight tin box, so in a few moments the old sailor was smoking contentedly. Trot knew it helped him to think when he was in any difficulty. Also, the pipe did much to restore the old sailor's composure after his long ducking and his terrible fright, a fright that was more on Trot's account than his own. The sand was dry where they sat, and soaked up the water that dripped from their clothing. When Trot had squeezed the wet out of her hair, she began to feel much like her old self again. By and by they got upon their feet, and crept up the incline to the scattered boulders above. Some of these were of huge size, but by passing between some and around others, they were able to reach the extreme rear of the cavern.
"Yes,"
said Trot, with interest.
"Here's a round hole."
"And it's black as night inside it,"
remarked Cap'n Bill.
"Just the same,"
answered the girl.
"We ought to explore it and see where it goes, 'cause it's the only possible way we can get out of this place."
Cap'n Bill eyed the hole doubtfully.
"It may be a way out of here, Trot,"
he said.
"but it may be a way into a far worse place than this. I'm not sure but our best plan is to stay right here."
Trot wasn't sure either when she thought of it in that light. After a while she made her way back to the sands again, and Cap'n Bill followed her. As they sat down, the child looked thoughtfully at the sailor's bulging pockets.
"How much food have we got, Captain?"
she asked.
"Half a dozen ship's biscuits and a hunk of cheese,"
he replied.
"Want some now, Trot?"
She shook her head, saying,
"That ought to keep us alive 'bout 3 days if we're careful of it."
"Longer'n that, Trot,"
said Cap'n Bill, but his voice was a little troubled and unsteady.
"But if we stay here we're bound to starve in time,"
continued the girl.
"While if we go into the dark hole—"
"Some things are more hard to face than starvation,"
said the sailor man gravely.
"We don't know what's inside that dark hole, Trot. nor where it might lead us to.
There's a way to find that out,
she persisted. Instead of replying, Cap'n Bill began searching his pockets. He soon drew out a little package of fish hooks and a long line. Trot watched him join them together. Then he crept a little way up the slope and turned over a big rock. 2 or 3 small crabs began scurrying away over the sands, and the old sailor caught them and put one on his hook and the others in his pocket. Coming back to the pool, he swung the hook over his shoulder and circled it around his head and cast it nearly into the center of the water, where he allowed it to sink gradually, paying out the line as far as it would go. When the end was reached, he began drawing it in again, until the crab bait was floating on the surface. Trot watched him cast the line a second time, and a third. She decided that either there were no fishes in the pool, or they would not bite the crab bait. But Cap'n Bill was an old fisherman, and not easily discouraged. When the crab got away, he put another on the hook. When the crabs were all gone, he climbed up the rocks and found some more. Meantime, Trot tired of watching him, and lay down upon the sands, where she fell fast asleep. During the next 2 hours her clothing dried completely, as did that of the old sailor. They were both so used to salt water that there was no danger of taking cold. Finally the little girl was wakened by a splash beside her, and a grunt of satisfaction from Cap'n Bill. She opened her eyes to find that the captain had landed a silver-scaled fish weighing about 2 pounds. This cheered her considerably, and she hurried to scrape together a heap of seaweed, while Cap'n Bill cut up the fish with his jackknife and got it ready for cooking. They had cooked fish with seaweed before. Cap'n Bill wrapped his fish in some of the weed and dipped it in the water to dampen it. Then he lighted a match and set fire to Trot's heap, which speedily burned down to a glowing bed of ashes. Then they laid the wrapped fish on the ashes, covered it with more seaweed, and allowed this to catch fire and burn to embers. After feeding the fire with seaweed for some time, the sailor finally decided that their supper was ready, so he scattered the ashes and drew out the bits of fish, still encased in their smoking wrappings. When these wrappings were removed, the fish was found thoroughly cooked, and both Trot and Cap'n Bill ate of it freely. It had a slight flavor of seaweed, and would have been better with a sprinkling of salt. The soft glow which until now had lighted the cavern began to grow dim, but there was a great quantity of seaweed in the place, so after they had eaten their fish they kept the fire alive for a time by giving it a handful of fuel now and then. From an inner pocket the sailor drew a small flask of battered metal, and unscrewing the cap handed it to Trot. She took but 1 swallow of the water, although she wanted more, and she noticed that Cap'n Bill merely wet his lips with it.
"Suppose," said
she, staring at the glowing seaweed fire, and speaking slowly,
"that we can catch all the fish we need. How about the drinking water, Cap'n?"
He moved uneasily, but did not reply. Both of them were thinking about the dark hole, but while Trot had little fear of it, the old man could not overcome his dislike to enter the place. He knew that Trot was right, though. To remain in the cavern, where they now were, could only result in slow but sure death. It was night-time up on the earth's surface, so the little girl became drowsy and soon fell asleep. After a time the old sailor slumbered on the sands beside her. It was very still, and nothing disturbed them for hours. When at last they awoke, the cavern was light again. They had divided one of the biscuits and were munching it for breakfast, when they were startled by a sudden splash in the pool. Looking toward it, they saw emerging from the water the most curious creature either of them had ever beheld. It wasn't a fish, Trot decided, nor was it a beast. It had wings, though, and queer wings they were, shaped like an inverted chopping bowl and covered with tough skin instead of feathers. It had 4 legs, much like the legs of a stork, only double the number, and its head was shaped a good deal like that of a poll parrot, with a beak that curved downward in front and upward at the edges, and was half bill and half mouth. But to call it a bird was out of the question, because it had no feathers whatever, except a crest of wavy plumes of a scarlet color on the very top of its head. The strange creature must have weighed as much as Cap'n Bill, and as it floundered and struggled to get out of the water to the sandy beach, it was so big and unusual that both Trot and her companion stared at it in wonder that was not unmixed with fear. End of chapter 2.
The Scarecrow of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Scarecrow of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 3. The Orc. The eyes that regarded them, as the creature stood dripping before them, were bright and mild in expression, and the queer addition to their party made no attempt to attack them, and seemed quite as surprised by the meeting as they were.
I wonder,
whispered Trot,
what it is.
Who, me?
exclaimed the creature in a shrill, high-pitched voice.
Why, I'm an orc.
Oh,
said the girl.
But what is an orc?
I am,
he repeated, a little proudly, as he shook the water from his funny wings.
And if ever an orc was glad to be out of the water and on dry land again, you can be mighty sure that I'm that especial individual orc.
Have you been in the water long?
inquired Cap'n Bill, thinking it only polite to show an interest in the strange creature.
Why, this last ducking was about 10 minutes, I believe, and that's about 9 minutes and 60 seconds too long for comfort,
was the reply.
But last night I was in an awful pickle, I assure you. The whirlpool caught me and—
Oh, were you in the whirlpool too?
asked Trot eagerly. He gave her a glance that was somewhat reproachful.
I believe I was mentioning the fact, young lady, when your desire to talk interrupted me,
said the orc.
I am not usually careless in my actions, but that whirlpool was so busy yesterday that I thought I'd see what mischief it was up to. So I flew a little too near it, and the suction of the air drew me down into the depths of the ocean. Water and I are natural enemies, and it would have conquered me this time had not a bevy of pretty mermaids come to my assistance and dragged me away from the whirling water and far up into a cavern, where they deserted me.
Why, that's about the same thing that happened to us,
cried Trot.
Was your cavern like this one?
I haven't examined this one yet,
answered the orc.
But if they happen to be alike, I shudder at our fate, for the other one was a prison with no outlet except by means of the water. I stayed there all night, however, and this morning I plunged into the pool as far down as I could go, and then swam as hard as I could. The rocks scraped my back now and then, and I barely escaped the clutches of an ugly sea monster. But by and by I came to the surface to catch my breath, and found myself here. That's the whole story, and as I see you have something to eat, I entreat you to give me a share of it. The truth is, I'm half starved.
With these words, the orc squatted down beside them. Very reluctantly, Cap'n Bill drew another biscuit from his pocket and held it out. The orc promptly seized it in one of its front claws and began to nibble the biscuit in much the same manner a parrot might have done.
We haven't much grub,
said the sailor man,
but we're willing to share it with a comrade in distress.
That's right,
returned the orc, cocking its head sideways in a cheerful manner, and then for a few minutes there was silence, while they all ate of the biscuits. After a while, Trot said,
I've never seen or heard of an orc before. Are there many of you?
We are rather few and exclusive, I believe,
was the reply.
In the country where I was born, we are the absolute rulers of all living things, from ants to elephants.
What country is that?
asked Cap'n Bill.
Orkland.
Where does it lie?
I don't know exactly, you see. I have a restless nature for some reason, while all the rest of my race are quiet and contented orcs, and seldom stray far from home. From childhood days I loved to fly long distances away, although father often warned me that I would get into trouble by doing so. "It's a big world, Flipper, my son," he would say, "and I've heard that in parts of it live queer two-legged creatures called men, who war upon all other living things, and would have little respect for even an orc." This naturally aroused my curiosity, and after I had completed my education and left school, I decided to fly out into the world and try to get a glimpse of the creatures called men. So I left home without saying good-bye, an act I shall always regret. Adventures were many, I found. I sighted men several times, but have never before been so close to them as now. Also, I had to flight my way through the air, for I met gigantic birds, with fluffy feathers all over them, which attacked me fiercely. Besides, it kept me busy escaping from floating airships. In my rambling I had lost all track of distance or direction, so that when I wanted to go home I had no idea where my country was located. I've not been trying to find it for several months, and it was during one of my flights over the ocean that I met the whirlpool and became its victim."
Trot and Cap'n Bill listened to this recital with much interest, and from the friendly tone and harmless appearance of the orc, they judged he was not likely to prove so disagreeable a companion as at first they had feared he might be. The orc sat upon its haunches much as a cat does, but used the finger-like claws of its front legs almost as cleverly as if they were hands. Perhaps the most curious thing about the creature was its tail, or what ought to have been its tail. This queer arrangement of skin, bones, and muscle was shaped like the propellers used on boats and airships, having fan-like surfaces and being pivoted to its body. Cap'n Bill knew something of mechanics, and observing the propeller-like tail of the orc, he said,
"I suppose you're a pretty swift flyer?"
"Yes, indeed. The orcs are admitted to be kings of the air."
Your wings don't seem to amount to much,"
remarked Trot.
"Well, they are not very big,"
admitted the orc, waving the 4 hollow skins gently to and fro.
"but they serve to support my body in the air while I speed along by means of my tail. Still, taken altogether, I'm very handsomely formed, don't you think?"
Trot did not like to reply, but Cap'n Bill nodded gravely.
"For an orc,"
said he,
"you're a wonder. I've never seen one afore, but I can imagine you're as good as any."
That seemed to please the creature, and it began walking around the cavern, making its way easily up the slope. While it was gone, Trot and Cap'n Bill each took another sip from the water flask to wash down their breakfast.
"Why, here's a hole, an exit, an outlet!"
exclaimed the orc from above.
"We know,"
said Trot.
"We found it last night."
"Well, then let's be off,"
continued the orc, after sticking its head into the black hole and sniffing once or twice.
"The air seems fresh and sweet, and it can't lead us to any worse place than this."
The girl and the sailor man got up and climbed to the side of the orc.
"We'd about decided to explore this hole before you came,"
explained Cap'n Bill.
"but it's a dangerous place to navigate in the dark, so wait till I light a candle."
"What is a candle?"
inquired the orc.
"You'll see in a minute,"
said Trot. The old sailor drew one of the candles from his right side pocket and the tin matchbox from his left side pocket. When he lighted the match, the orc gave a startled jump and eyed the flame suspiciously, but Cap'n Bill proceeded to light the candle, and the action interested the orc very much.
"Light,"
it said somewhat nervously,
"is valuable in a hole of this sort. The candle is not dangerous, I hope."
"Sometimes it burns your fingers,"
answered Trot.
"but that's about the worst it can do, except to blow out when you don't want it to."
Cap'n Bill shielded the flame with his hand and crept into the hole. It wasn't any too big for a grown man, but after he had crawled a few feet it grew larger. Trot came close behind him, and then the orc followed.
Seems like a regular tunnel,
muttered the sailor-man, who was creeping along awkwardly because of his wooden leg. The rocks, too, hurt his knees. For nearly half an hour the three moved slowly along the tunnel, which made many twists and turns, and sometimes slanted downward, and sometimes upward. Finally Cap'n Bill stopped short, with an exclamation of disappointment, and held the flickering candle far ahead to light the scene.
"What's wrong?"
demanded Trot, who could see nothing because the sailor's form completely filled the hole.
Why, we've come to the end of our travels, I guess,
he replied.
Is the hole blocked?
Inquired the Orc.
No, it's worse nor that,
replied Cap'n Bill sadly.
I'm on the edge of a precipice. Wait a minute and I'll move along and let you see for yourselves. Be careful, Trot, not to fall.
Then he crept forward a little and moved to one side, holding the candle so that the girl could see to follow him. The Orc came next, and now all three knelt on a narrow ledge of rock, which dropped straight away and left a huge black space, which the tiny flame of the candle could not illuminate. Said the Orc, peering over the edge.
This doesn't look very promising, I'll admit, but let me take your candle and I'll fly down and see what's below us.
"Aren't you afraid?"
asked Trot.
Certainly I'm afraid,
responded the Orc.
But if we intend to escape, we can't stay on this shelf forever. So as I notice you poor creatures cannot fly, it is my duty to explore the place for you.
Cap'n Bill handed the Orc the candle, which had now burned to about half its length. The Orc took it in one claw rather cautiously, and then tipped its body forward and slipped over the edge. They heard a queer buzzing sound as the tail revolved, and a brisk flapping of the peculiar wings, but they were more interested just then in following with their eyes the tiny speck of light which marked the location of the candle. This light first made a great circle, then dropped slowly downward, and suddenly was extinguished, leaving everything before them black as ink.
"Hi there! How did that happen?"
cried the Orc.
It blew out, I guess,
shouted Cap'n Bill.
Fetch it here.
I can't see where you are,
said the Orc. So Cap'n Bill got out another candle and lighted it, and its flame enabled the Orc to fly back to them. It alighted on the edge and held out the bit of candle.
What made it stop burning?
asked the creature.
"The wind,"
said Trot.
"You must be more careful this time."
What's the place like?
inquired Cap'n Bill.
I don't know yet, but there must be a bottom to it, so I'll try to find it.
With this, the Orc started out again, and this time sank downward more slowly. Down, down, down it went, till the candle was a mere spark, and then it headed away to the left, and Trot and Cap'n Bill lost all sight of it. In a few minutes, however, they saw the spark of light again, and as the sailor still held the second lighted candle, the Orc made straight toward them. It was only a few yards distant, when suddenly it dropped the candle with a cry of pain, and next moment alighted, fluttering wildly, upon the rocky ledge.
"What's the matter?"
asked Trot.
It bit me,
wailed the Orc.
I don't like your candles. The thing began to disappear slowly as soon as I took it in my claw, and it grew smaller and smaller until just now it turned and bit me. A most unfriendly thing to do. Ah, ouch, what a bite!
That's the nature of candles, I'm sorry to say,
explained Cap'n Bill with a grin.
You have to handle 'em mighty careful. But tell us, what did you find down there?
I found a way to continue our journey,
said the Orc, nursing tenderly the claw which had been burned.
Just below us is a great lake of black water, which looks so cold and wicked that it made me shudder. But away at the left there's a big tunnel, which we can easily walk through. I don't know where it leads to, of course, but we must follow it and find out.
"Why, we can't get to it,"
protested the little girl.
"We can't fly as you do, you must remember."
No, that's true,
replied the Orc musingly.
Your bodies are built very poorly, it seems to me, since all you can do is crawl upon the earth's surface. but you may ride upon my back, and in that way I can promise you a safe journey to the tunnel."
"Are you strong enough to carry us?"
asked Cap'n Bill doubtfully.
"Yes, indeed. I'm strong enough to carry a dozen of you if you could find a place to sit,"
was the reply.
"but there's only room between my wings for one at a time, so I'll have to make 2 trips."
"All right, I'll go first,"
decided Cap'n Bill. He lit another candle for Trot to hold while they were gone, and to light the Orc on his return to her, and then the old sailor got upon the Orc's back, where he sat with his wooden legs sticking straight out sideways.
"If you start to fall, clasp your arms around my neck,"
advised the creature.
"If I start to fall, it's good night and pleasant dreams,"
said Cap'n Bill.
"All ready?"
asked the Orc.
"Start the buzztail,"
said Cap'n Bill, with a tremble in his voice. But the Orc flew away so gently that the old man never even tottered in his seat. Trot watched the light of Cap'n Bill's candle till it disappeared in the far distance. She didn't like to be left alone on this dangerous ledge, with a lake of black water hundreds of feet below her, but she was a brave little girl, and waited patiently for the return of the Orc. It came even sooner than she had expected, and the creature said to her,
"Your friend is safe in the tunnel. Now then, get aboard and I'll carry you to him in a jiffy."
I'm sure not many little girls would have cared to take that awful ride through the huge black cavern on the back of a skinny Orc. Trot didn't care for it herself, but it just had to be done, and so she did it as courageously as possible. Her heart beat fast, and she was so nervous she could scarcely hold the candle in her fingers as the Orc sped swiftly through the darkness. It seemed like a long ride to her, yet in reality the Orc covered the distance in a wonderfully brief period of time, and soon Trot stood safely beside Cap'n Bill on the level floor of a big, arched tunnel. The sailor man was very glad to greet his little comrade again, and both were grateful to the Orc for his assistance.
"I don't know where this tunnel leads to,"
remarked Cap'n Bill,
"but it surely looks more promising than that other hole we crept through."
When the Orc is rested,
said Trot.
we'll travel on and see what happens."
"Rested!"
cried the Orc, as scornfully as his shrill voice would allow.
"That bit of flying didn't tire me at all. I'm used to flying days at a time without ever stopping."
"Then let's move on,"
proposed Cap'n Bill. He still held in his hand one lighted candle, so Trot blew out the other flame and placed her candle in the sailor's big pocket. She knew it was not wise to burn 2 candles at once. The tunnel was straight and smooth and very easy to walk through, so they made good progress. Trot thought that the tunnel began about 2 miles from the cavern where they had been cast by the whirlpool, but now it was impossible to guess the miles travelled, for they walked steadily for hours and hours, without any change in their surroundings. Finally Cap'n Bill stopped to rest.
"There's something queer about this 'ere tunnel, I'm certain,"
he declared, wagging his head dolefully.
"Here's 3 candles gone already, and only 3 more left us. Yet the tunnel's the same as it was when we started, and how long it's going to keep up no one knows."
"Couldn't we walk without a light?"
asked Trot.
"The way seems safe enough."
"It does right now,"
was the reply.
"but we can't tell when we are likely to come to another gulf, or something just as dangerous. In that case, we'd be killed afore we knew it."
"Suppose I go ahead,"
suggested the Orc.
"I don't fear a fall, you know, and if anything happens, I'll call out and warn you."
"That's a good idea,"
declared Trot, and Cap'n Bill thought so too. So the Orc started off ahead, quite in the dark, and hand in hand the 2 followed him. When they had walked in this way for a good long time, the Orc halted and demanded food. Cap'n Bill had not mentioned food because there was so little left, only 3 biscuits and a lump of cheese about as big as his 2 fingers, but he gave the Orc half of a biscuit, sighing as he did so. The creature didn't care for the cheese, so the sailor divided it between himself and Trot. They lighted a candle and sat down in the tunnel while they ate.
"My feet hurt me,"
grumbled the Orc.
"I'm not used to walking, and this rocky passage is so uneven and lumpy that it hurts me to walk upon it."
"Can't you fly along?"
asked Trot.
"No, the roof is too low,"
said the Orc. After the meal they resumed their journey, which Trot began to fear would never end. When Cap'n Bill noticed how tired the little girl was, he paused and lighted a match, and looked at his big silver watch.
"Why, it's night!"
he exclaimed.
"We've tramped all day, and still we're in this awful passage, which mebbe goes straight through the middle of the world, and mebbe is a circle, in which case we can keep walking till doomsday. Not knowing what's before us so well as we know what's behind us, I propose we make a stop now, and try to sleep till morning."
"That will suit me,"
asserted the Orc with a groan.
"My feet are hurting me dreadfully, and for the last few miles I've been limping with pain."
"My foot hurts too,"
said the sailor, looking for a smooth place on the rocky floor to sit down.
"Your foot?"
cried the Orc.
"Why, you've only one to hurt you, while I have 4. So I suffer 4 times as much as you possibly can. Here, hold the candle while I look at the bottom of my claws. I declare,"
he said, examining them by the flickering light,
"there are bunches of pains all over them."
"Perhaps,"
said Trot, who was very glad to sit down beside her companions,
"you've got corns."
"Corns? Nonsense! Orcs never have corns,"
protested the creature, rubbing its sore feet tenderly.
"Then maybe they're what do you call 'em, Cap'n Bill? Something about the Pilgrim's Progress, you know."
"Onions,"
said Cap'n Bill.
"Oh, yes, maybe you've got bunions."
"It is possible,"
moaned the Orc.
"but whatever they are, another day of such walking on them would drive me crazy."
"I'm sure they'll feel better by morning,"
said Cap'n Bill encouragingly.
"Go to sleep and try to forget your sore feet."
The Orc cast a reproachful look at the sailor man, who didn't see it. Then the creature asked plaintively,
"Do we eat now, or do we starve?"
"There's only half a biscuit left for you,"
answered Cap'n Bill.
"No one knows how long we'll have to stay in this dark tunnel, where there's nothing whatever to eat, so I advise you to save that morsel of food till later."
"Give it to me now,"
demanded the Orc.
"If I'm going to starve, I'll do it all at once, not by degrees."
Cap'n Bill produced the biscuit, and the creature ate it in a trice. Trot was rather hungry, and whispered to Cap'n Bill that she'd take part of her share, but the old man secretly broke his own half-biscuit in 2, saving Trot's share for a time of greater need. He was beginning to be worried over the little girl's plight, and long after she was asleep, and the Orc was snoring in a rather disagreeable manner, Cap'n Bill sat with his back to a rock, and smoked his pipe, and tried to think of some way to escape from this seemingly endless tunnel. But after a time he also slept, for hobbling on a wooden leg all day was tiresome, and there in the dark slumbered the 3 adventurers for many hours, until the Orc roused itself and kicked the old sailor with one foot.
"It must be another day,"
said he. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of The Scarecrow of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Scarecrow of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 4. Daylight at Last. Cap'n Bill rubbed his eyes, lit a match, and consulted his watch.
9 o'clock. Yes, I guess it's another day, sure enough. Shall we go on?
He asked.
"Of course,"
said the Orc.
"Unless this tunnel is different from everything else in the world and has no end, we'll find a way out of it sooner or later."
The sailor gently wakened Trot. She felt much rested by her long sleep, and sprang to her feet eagerly.
"Let's start, Cap'n,"
was all she said. They resumed the journey, and had only taken a few steps when the Orc cried, "Wow!" and made a great fluttering of its wings and whirling of its tail. The others, who were following a short distance behind, stopped abruptly.
"What's the matter?"
asked Cap'n Bill.
"Give us a light,"
was the reply.
"I think we've come to the end of the tunnel."
Then, while Cap'n Bill lighted a candle, the creature added,
"If that is true, we needn't have wakened so soon, so we were almost at the end of this place when we went to sleep."
The sailor man and Trot came forward with a light. A wall of rock really faced the tunnel, but now they saw that the opening made a sharp turn to the left. So they followed on, by a narrower passage, and then made another sharp turn, this time to the right.
"Blow out the candle, Captain,"
said the Orc in a pleased voice.
"We've struck daylight."
Daylight at last. A shaft of mellow light fell almost at their feet as Trot and the sailor turned the corner of the passage, but it came from above, and raising their eyes, they found they were at the bottom of a deep rocky well, with the top far, far above their heads. And here the passage ended. For a while they gazed in silence, at least two of them being filled with dismay at the sight. But the Orc merely whistled softly and said cheerfully,
"That was the toughest journey I ever had the misfortune to undertake, and I'm glad it's over. Yet unless I can manage to fly to the top of this pit, we are entombed here forever."
Do you think there's room enough for you to fly in?
asked the little girl anxiously, and Cap'n Bill added,
"It's a straight-up shaft, so I don't see how you'll ever manage it."
"Were I an ordinary bird, one of those horrid feathered things, I wouldn't even make the attempt to fly out,"
said the Orc.
"But my mechanical propeller tail can accomplish wonders, and whenever you're ready I'll show you a trick that is worth while."
"Oh!"
exclaimed Trot.
"Do you intend to take us up too?"
"Why not?"
"I thought,"
said Cap'n Bill,
"as you'd go first, and then send somebody to help us by letting down a rope."
"Ropes are dangerous,"
replied the Orc.
"and I might not be able to find one to reach all this distance. Besides, it stands to reason that if I can get out myself, I can also carry you two with me."
"Well, I'm not afraid,"
said Trot, who longed to be on the earth's surface again.
"S'pose we fall,"
suggested Cap'n Bill doubtfully.
"Why, in that case we would all fall together,"
returned the Orc.
"Get aboard, little girl, sit across my shoulders, and put both your arms around my neck."
Trot obeyed, and when she was seated on the Orc, Cap'n Bill inquired,
"How about me, Mr. Orc?"
"Why, I think you'd best grab hold of my rear legs and let me carry you up in that manner,"
was the reply. Cap'n Bill looked way up at the top of the well, and then he looked at the Orc's slender, skinny legs, and heaved a deep sigh.
"It's going to be some dangle, I guess. But if you don't waste too much time on the way up, I may be able to hang on,"
said he.
"All ready, then,"
cried the Orc, and at once his whirling tail began to revolve. Trot felt herself rising into the air. When the creature's legs left the ground, Cap'n Bill grasped two of them firmly and held on for dear life. The Orc's body was tipped straight upward, and Trot had to embrace the neck very tightly to keep from sliding off. Even in this position, the Orc had trouble in escaping the rough sides of the well. Several times it exclaimed, "Wow!" as it bumped its back, or a wing hit against some jagged projection, but the tail kept whirling with remarkable swiftness, and the daylight grew brighter and brighter. It was, indeed, a long journey from the bottom to the top, yet almost before Trot realized they had come so far, they popped out of the hole into the clear air and sunshine, and a moment later the Orc alighted gently upon the ground. The release was so sudden that even with the creature's care for its passengers, Cap'n Bill struck the earth with a shock that sent him rolling heel over head. But by the time Trot had slid down from her seat, the old sailor man was sitting up and looking around him with much satisfaction.
"It's sort of pretty here,"
said he.
"Earth is a beautiful place,"
cried Trot.
I wonder where on earth we are,
pondered the Orc, turning first one bright eye and then the other to this side and that. Trees there were, in plenty, and shrubs and flowers and green turf. But there were no houses, there were no paths, there was no sign of civilization whatever.
Just before I settled down on the ground I thought I caught a view of the ocean,
said the Orc.
Let's see if I was right.
Then he flew to a little hill near by, and Trot and Cap'n Bill followed him more slowly. When they stood on the top of the hill, they could see the blue waves of the ocean in front of them, to the right of them, and at the left of them. Behind the hill was a forest that shut out the view.
I hope it ain't an island, Trot,
said Cap'n Bill gravely.
If it is, I suppose we're prisoners,
she replied.
Exactly so, Trot.
But even so, it's better than those terrible underground tunnels and caverns,
declared the girl.
You are right, little one,
agreed the Orc.
Anything above ground is better than the best that lies underground, so let's not quarrel with our fate, but be thankful we've escaped.
We are indeed,
she replied.
But I wonder if we can find something to eat in this place.
Let's explore and find out,
proposed Cap'n Bill.
Those trees over at the left look like cherry trees.
On the way to them, the explorers had to walk through a tangle of vines, and Cap'n Bill, who went first, stumbled and pitched forward on his face.
Why, it's a melon!
cried Trot delightedly, as she saw what had caused the sailor to fall. Cap'n Bill rose to his foot, for he was not at all hurt, and examined the melon. Then he took his big jackknife from his pocket and cut the melon open. It was quite ripe and looked delicious, but the old man tasted it before he permitted Trot to eat any. Deciding it was good, he gave her a big slice, and then offered the Orc some. The creature looked at the fruit somewhat disdainfully at first, but once he had tasted its flavour, he ate of it as heartily as did the others. Among the vines, they discovered many other melons, and Trot said gratefully, "Well, there's no danger of our starving, even if this is an island."
Melons,
remarked Cap'n Bill,
are both food and water. We couldn't have struck anything better.
Farther on they came to the cherry trees, where they obtained some of the fruit, and at the edge of the little forest were wild plums. The forest itself consisted entirely of nut trees, walnuts, filberts, almonds, and chestnuts, so there would be plenty of wholesome food for them while they remained there. Cap'n Bill and Trot decided to walk through the forest to discover what was on the other side of it, but the Orc's feet were still so sore and lumpy from walking on the rocks that the creature said he preferred to fly over the treetops and meet them on the other side. The forest was not large, so by walking briskly for 15 minutes they reached its farthest edge and saw before them the shore of the ocean.
It's an island, all right,
said Trot, with a sigh.
Yes, and a pretty island, too,
said Cap'n Bill, trying to conceal his disappointment on Trot's account.
I guess, partner, if the worst comes to the worst, I could build a raft, or even a boat, from those trees, so's we could sail away in it.
The little girl brightened at this suggestion.
I don't see the Orc anywhere,
she remarked, looking around. Then her eyes lighted upon something, and she exclaimed,
"Oh, Cap'n Bill! Isn't that a house over there to the left?"
Cap'n Bill, looking closely, saw a shed-like structure built at one edge of the forest.
Seems like it, Trot. Not that I'd call it much of a house, but it's a building, all right. Let's go over and see if it's occupied.
End of chapter 4.
The Scarecrow of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Scarecrow of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 5. The Little Old Man of the Island. A few steps brought them to the shed, which was merely a roof of boughs built over a square space, with some branches of trees fastened to the sides, to keep off the wind. The front was quite open, and faced the sea, and as our friends came nearer they observed a little man, with a long pointed beard, sitting motionless on a stool and staring thoughtfully out over the water.
"Get out of the way, please,"
he called in a fretful voice.
"Can't you see you're obstructing my view?"
Good morning,
said Cap'n Bill, politely.
"It isn't a good morning,"
snapped the little man.
"I've seen plenty of mornings better than this. Do you call it a good morning when I'm pestered with such a crowd as you?"
Trot was astonished to hear such words from a stranger whom they had greeted quite properly, and Cap'n Bill grew red at the little man's rudeness. But the sailor said, in a quiet tone of voice,
"Are you the only one as lives on this here island?"
"Your grammar's bad,"
was the reply.
"but this is my own exclusive island, and I'll thank you to get off it as soon as possible."
We'd like to do that,
said Trot, and then she and Cap'n Bill turned away and walked down to the shore to see if any other land were in sight. The little man rose and followed them, although both were now too provoked to pay any attention to him.
"Nothing in sight, partner,"
reported Cap'n Bill, shading his eyes with his hand.
"So we'll have to stay here for a time, anyhow. It isn't a bad place, Trot, by any means."
"That's all you know about it,"
broke in the little man.
"The trees are altogether too green, and the rocks are harder than they ought to be. I find the sand very grainy and the water dreadfully wet. Every breeze makes a draught, and the sun shines in the daytime when there's no need of it, and disappears just as soon as it begins to get dark. If you remain here, you'll find the island very unsatisfactory."
Trot turned to look at him, and her sweet face was grave and curious.
"I wonder who you are,"
she said.
"My name is Pessum,"
said he, with an air of pride.
"I'm called the Observer."
"Oh, what do you observe?"
asked the little girl.
"Everything I see,"
was the reply, in a more surly tone. Then Pessum drew back with a startled exclamation, and looked at some footprints in the sand.
"Why, good gracious me!"
he cried in distress.
"What's the matter now?"
asked Cap'n Bill.
"Someone has pushed the earth in, don't you see it?"
"It isn't pushed in far enough to hurt anything,"
said Trot, examining the footprints.
"Everything hurts that isn't right,"
insisted the man.
"If the earth were pushed in a mile, it would be a great calamity, wouldn't it?"
"I suppose so,"
admitted the little girl.
"Well, here it is pushed in a full inch. That's a 1/12 of a foot, or a little more than a millionth part of a mile. Therefore, it is 1/1,000,000th part of a calamity. Oh dear, how dreadful!"
said Pessum in a wailing voice.
"Try to forget it, sir,"
advised Cap'n Bill, soothingly.
"It's beginning to rain. Let's get under your shed and keep dry."
"Raining? Is it really raining?"
asked Pessum, beginning to weep.
"It is,"
answered Cap'n Bill, as the drops began to descend.
"and I don't see any way to stop it, although I'm some observer myself."
"No, we can't stop it, I fear,"
said the man.
"Are you very busy just now?"
"I won't be after I get to the shed,"
replied the sailor man.
"Then do me a favor, please,"
begged Pessum, walking briskly along behind them, for they were hastening to the shed.
"Depends on what it is,"
said Cap'n Bill.
"I wish you would take my umbrella down to the shore and hold it over the poor fishes till it stops raining. I'm afraid they'll get wet,"
said Pessum. Trot laughed, but Cap'n Bill thought the little man was poking fun at him, and so he scowled upon Pessum in a way that showed he was angry. They reached the shed before getting very wet, although the rain was now coming down in big drops. The roof of the shed protected them, and while they stood watching the rainstorm, something buzzed in and circled around Pessum's head. At once the observer began beating it away with his hands, crying out,
"A bumblebee! A bumblebee! The queerest bumblebee I ever saw!"
Cap'n Bill and Trot both looked at it, and the little girl said in surprise,
"Dear me, it's a wee little orc."
"That's what it is, sure enough,"
exclaimed Cap'n Bill. Really, it wasn't much bigger than a big bumblebee, and when it came towards Trot, she allowed it to alight on her shoulder.
"It's me, all right,
said a very small voice in her ear.
but I'm in an awful pickle just the same."
"What? Are you our orc, then?"
demanded the girl, much amazed.
No, I'm my own orc, but I'm the only orc you know,
replied the tiny creature.
What's happened to you?
Asked the sailor, putting his head close to Trot's shoulder in order to hear the reply better. Pessim also put his head close, and the orc said,
You will remember that when I left you, I started to fly over the trees, and just as I got to this side of the forest, I saw a bush that was loaded down with the most luscious fruit you can imagine. The fruit was about the size of a gooseberry and of a lovely lavender color, so I swooped down and picked off one in my bill and ate it. At once I began to grow small. I could feel myself shrinking away, and it frightened me terribly, so that I lighted on the ground to think over what was happening. In a few seconds I had shrunk to the size you now see me. But there I remained, getting no smaller indeed, but no larger. It is certainly a dreadful affliction. After I had recovered somewhat from the shock, I began to search for you. It is not so easy to find one's way when a creature is so small, but fortunately I spied you here in this shed and came to you at once.
Cap'n Bill and Trot were much astonished at this story, and felt grieved for the poor orc, but the little man Pessim seemed to think it a good joke. He began laughing when he heard the story, and laughed until he choked, after which he lay down on the ground and rolled and laughed again, while the tears of merriment coursed down his wrinkled cheeks.
Oh dear,
he finally gasped, sitting up and wiping his eyes.
This is too rich. It's almost too joyful to be true.
I don't see anything funny about it,
remarked Trot indignantly.
You would if you'd had my experience,
said Pessim, getting upon his feet and gradually resuming his solemn and dissatisfied expression of countenance.
The same thing happened to me.
Oh, did it? And how did you happen to come to this island?
Asked the girl.
I didn't come. The neighbors brought me,
replied the little man, with a frown at the recollection.
They said I was quarrelsome and fault-finding, and blamed me because I told them all the things that went wrong, or never were right, and because I told them how things ought to be. So they brought me here and left me all alone, saying that if I quarrelled with myself, no one else would be made unhappy. Absurd, wasn't it?
Seems to me,
said Cap'n Bill,
those neighbors did the proper thing.
Well,
resumed Pessim,
when I found myself king of this island, I was obliged to live upon fruits, and I found many fruits growing here that I had never seen before. I tasted several, and found them good and wholesome. But one day I ate a lavender berry, as the orc did, and immediately I grew so small that I was scarcely 2 inches high. It was a very unpleasant condition, and like the orc I became frightened. I could not walk very well nor very far, for every lump of earth in my way seemed a mountain, every blade of grass a tree, and every grain of sand a rocky boulder. For several days I stumbled around in an agony of fear. Once a tree toad nearly gobbled me up, and if I ran out from the shelter of the bushes the gulls and cormorants swooped down upon me. Finally I decided to eat another berry and become nothing at all, since life, to one as small as I was, had become a dreary nightmare. At last I found a small tree that I thought bore the same fruit as that I had eaten. The berry was dark purple instead of light lavender, but otherwise it was quite similar. Being unable to climb the tree, I was obliged to wait underneath it until a sharp breeze arose and shook the limbs so that a berry fell. Instantly I seized it, and taking a last view of the world, as I then thought, I ate the berry in a twinkling. Then, to my surprise, I began to grow big again, until I became of my former stature, and so I have since remained. Needless to say, I have never eaten again of the lavender fruit, nor do any of the beasts or birds that live upon this island eat it.
They had all three listened eagerly to this amazing tale, and when it was finished, the orc exclaimed,
Do you think, then, that the deep purple berry is the antidote for the lavender one?
I'm sure of it,
answered Pessim.
Then lead me to the tree at once,
begged the orc,
for this tiny form I now have terrifies me greatly.
Pessim examined the orc closely.
You're ugly enough as you are,
said he.
Were you any larger, you might be dangerous.
Oh, no,
Trot assured him.
The orc has been our good friend. Please take us to the tree.
Then Pessim consented, although rather reluctantly. He led them to the right, which was the east side of the island, and in a few minutes brought them near to the edge of the grove which faced the shore of the ocean. Here stood a small tree, bearing berries of a deep purple colour. The fruit looked very enticing, and Cap'n Bill reached up and selected one that seemed especially plump and ripe. The Orc had remained perched upon Trot's shoulder, but now it flew down to the ground. It was so difficult for Cap'n Bill to kneel down with his wooden leg that the little girl took the berry from him and held it close to the Orc's head.
"It's too big to go into my mouth," said
the little creature, looking at the fruit sidewise.
"You'll have to make several mouthfuls of it, I guess,"
said Trot, and that is what the Orc did. He pecked at the soft, ripe fruit with his bill and ate it up very quickly, because it was good. Even before he had finished the berry, they could see the Orc begin to grow. In a few minutes he had regained his natural size and was strutting before them, quite delighted with his transformation.
"Well, well, what do you think of me now?"
he asked proudly.
"You are very skinny and remarkably ugly,"
declared Pessim.
"You are a poor judge of orcs,"
was the reply.
"Anyone can see that I'm much handsomer than those dreadful things called birds, which are all fluff and feathers."
"Their feathers make soft beds,"
asserted Pessim.
"And my skin would make excellent drumheads,"
retorted the Orc.
"Nevertheless, a plucked bird or a skinned orc would be of no value to himself, so we needn't brag of our usefulness after we are dead. But for the sake of argument, friend Pessim, I'd like to know what good you would be were you not alive."
"Never mind that,"
said Cap'n Bill.
"He isn't much good as he is."
"I am king of this island, allow me to say, and you're intruding on my property,"
declared the little man, scowling upon them.
"If you don't like me, and I'm sure you don't, for no one else does, why don't you go away and leave me to myself?"
"Well, the Orc can fly, but we can't,"
explained Trot in answer.
"We don't want to stay here a bit, but I don't see how we can get away."
"You can go back into the hole you came from."
Cap'n Bill shook his head. Trot shuddered at the thought. The Orc laughed aloud.
"You may be king here,"
the creature said to Pessim,
"but we intend to run this island to suit ourselves, for we are three and you are one, and the balance of power lies with us."
The little man made no reply to this, although as they walked back to the shed his face wore its fiercest scowl. Cap'n Bill gathered a lot of leaves, and, assisted by Trot, prepared 2 nice beds in opposite corners of the shed. Pessim slept in a hammock which he swung between 2 trees. They required no dishes, as all their food consisted of fruits and nuts picked from the trees. They made no fire, for the weather was warm and there was nothing to cook. The shed had no furniture other than the rude stool which the little man was accustomed to sit upon. He called it his throne, and they let him keep it. So they lived upon the island for 3 days, and rested and ate to their heart's content. Still, they were not at all happy in this life because of Pessim. He continually found fault with them, and all that they did, and all their surroundings. He could see nothing good or admirable in all the world, and Trot soon came to understand why the little man's former neighbours had brought him to this island, and left him there, all alone, so that he could not annoy anyone. It was their misfortune that they had been led to this place by their adventures, for often they would have preferred the company of a wild beast to that of Pessim. On the 4th day, a happy thought came to the Orc. They had all been racking their brains for a possible way to leave the island, and discussing this or that method, without finding a plan that was practical. Cap'n Bill had said he could make a raft of the trees, big enough to float them all, but he had no tools except those 2 pocket knives, and it was not possible to chop down trees with such small blades.
"And suppose we got afloat on the ocean,"
said Trot.
"Where would we drift to, and how long would it take us to get there?"
Cap'n Bill was forced to admit he didn't know. The Orc could fly away from the island any time it wished to, but the queer creature was loyal to his new friends, and refused to leave them in such a lonely, forsaken place. It was when Trot urged him to go, on this 4th morning, that the Orc had his happy thought.
"I will go,"
said he.
if you two will agree to ride upon my back."
"We are too heavy. You might drop us,"
objected Cap'n Bill.
"Yes, you are rather heavy for a long journey,
Acknowledged the Orc.
but you might eat one of those lavender berries and become so small that I could carry you with ease."
This quaint suggestion startled Trot, and she looked gravely at the speaker while she considered it. But Cap'n Bill gave a scornful snort and asked,
"What would become of us afterward? We wouldn't be much good if we were some 2 or 3 inches high. No, Mr. Orc, I'd rather stay here as I am than be a hop o' my thumb somewhere else."
"Why couldn't you take some of the dark purple berries along with you to eat after we had reached our destination?
inquired the Orc.
Then you could grow big again whenever you pleased."
Trot clapped her hands with delight.
That's it!
She exclaimed.
Let's do it, Cap'n Bill.
The old sailor did not like the idea at first, but he thought it over carefully, and the more he thought, the better it seemed.
"How could you manage to carry us if we were so small?"
he asked.
"I could put you in a paper bag and tie the bag round my neck."
But we haven't a paper bag,
objected Trot. The Orc looked at her.
"There's your sunbonnet,"
it said presently,
"which is hollow in the middle and has 2 strings that you could tie around my neck."
Trot took off her sunbonnet and regarded it critically. Yes, it might easily hold both her and Cap'n Bill, after they had eaten the lavender berries and been reduced in size. She tied the strings around the Orc's neck, and the sunbonnet made a bag in which 2 tiny people might ride without danger of falling out. So she said,
I believe we'll do it that way, Captain.
Cap'n Bill groaned, but could make no logical objection except that the plan seemed to him quite dangerous, and dangerous in more ways than one.
I think so myself,
said Trot soberly.
But nobody can stay alive without getting into danger sometimes, and danger doesn't mean getting hurt, Cap'n. It only means we might get hurt, so I guess we'll have to take the risk.
"Let's go and find the berries,"
said the Orc. They said nothing to Pessim, who was sitting on his stool and scowling dismally as he stared at the ocean, but started at once to seek the trees that bore the magic fruits. The Orc remembered very well where the lavender berries grew, and led his companions quickly to the spot. Cap'n Bill gathered 2 berries and placed them carefully in his pocket. Then they went around to the east side of the island and found the tree that bore the dark purple berries.
"Guess I'll take 4 of these,"
said the sailor man.
"So in case one doesn't make us grow big, we can eat another."
"Better take 6.
advised the Orc.
It's well to be on the safe side, and I'm sure these trees grow nowhere else in all the world."
So Cap'n Bill gathered 6 of the purple berries, and with their precious fruit they returned to the shed to bid good-bye to Pessim. Perhaps they would not have granted the surly little man this courtesy, had they not wished to use him to tie the sunbonnet around the Orc's neck. When Pessim learned they were about to leave him, he at first looked greatly pleased, but he suddenly recollected that nothing ought to please him, and so began to grumble about being left alone.
"We knew it wouldn't suit you,"
remarked Cap'n Bill.
"It didn't suit you to have us here, and it won't suit you to have us go away."
That is quite true,
admitted Pessim.
I haven't been suited since I can remember, so it doesn't matter to me in the least whether you go or stay.
He was interested in their experiment, however, and willingly agreed to assist, although he prophesied they would fall out of the sunbonnet on their way, and be either drowned in the ocean or crushed upon some rocky shore. This uncheerful prospect did not daunt Trot, but it made Cap'n Bill quite nervous.
I will eat my berry first,
said Trot, as she placed her sunbonnet on the ground in such manner that they could get into it. Then she ate the lavender berry, and in a few seconds became so small that Cap'n Bill picked her up gently with his thumb and one finger and placed her in the middle of the sunbonnet. Then he placed beside her the 6 purple berries, each one being about as big as the tiny Trot's head, and all preparations being now made, the old sailor ate his lavender berry, and became very small, wooden leg and all. Cap'n Bill stumbled sadly in trying to climb over the edge of the sunbonnet, and pitched in beside Trot head first, which caused the unhappy Pessim to laugh with glee. Then the king of the island picked up the sunbonnet, so rudely that he shook its occupants like peas in a pod, and tied it, by means of its strings, securely around the Orc's neck.
I hope, Trot, you sewed those strings on tight,
said Cap'n Bill anxiously.
Why, we're not very heavy, you know,
She replied.
so I think the stitches will hold. But be careful and not crush the berries, Cap'n.
One is jammed already,
He said, looking at them.
All ready?
Asked the Orc.
Yes!
They cried together, and Pessim came close to the sunbonnet and called out to them.
You'll be smashed or drowned, I'm sure you will. But farewell, and good riddance to you.
The Orc was provoked by this unkind speech, so he turned his tail towards the little man and made it revolve so fast that the rush of air tumbled Pessim over backwards, and he rolled several times upon the ground before he could stop himself and sit up. By that time the Orc was high in the air and speeding swiftly over the ocean. End of chapter 5.